so now I am ready to install the ball joints. They just arrived, they just got delivered, so I ended up going with the Dana Spicer kit 706944X, and I ended up getting them through Amazon because I needed 2-day shipping. I'm not real happy that the bottom ones can't be greased, but I've heard mixed reviews on that. One, it's too hard to grease anyway, and two, they say that they still end up being okay. I'm probably going to end up putting more grease inside this boot before I actually put the boot on and completely install it. The top one is greasable, and what I'm going to do is take the fitting off. That's a 7mm. I'll take that off before assembly so that I don't damage that part by accident. And then I'm also going to take the boots off during assembly so I don't damage those by accident as well. And then I'll reattach them after I have them pressed in. So I've already taken a digital caliper and just made sure that the dimensions were very close, and they are, between the uppers and the lowers. And I opened up both boxes to make sure all the parts were there, and measured both sets of ball joints against the old ones. So everything seems to be good there. Now I can go ahead and start the installation process. Alright, so before I got started, I went ahead and sanded down the inside of the casting there. I used some sandpaper, and then I also used a wire brush to get as much of the rust out as I could without taking any metal off. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grease the inside of that, and I'm also going to grease the ball joints. So one thing to point out is that when you're putting these back in, you want to do the lower ball joint first, because the upper joint needs to be open so that your clamp can go inside there. And if you do this on a lift, I don't think it matters, but you don't have enough room otherwise, I've been told anyway, to do this when you just have it jacked up. You don't have room to do the lower one after the upper one's been installed. So I'm going to go ahead and just do it in that order and warn you to do the same, since there were comments online about people doing it in reverse order and having to take the upper one back out. So I'm having to film this twice because the first time when I did the other side, I screwed up the video footage, so I had to get creative with a couple of things. I'm probably going to have to do that on this side as well. At least you don't have to watch me go through the trial and error, but some of this is, that's exactly what it is, just trial and error to use what I have to get the job done. So I'm going to go ahead and grease the parts and then go ahead and get started. Alright, so I think I have the setup that I want to use. So now, get a big old ratcheting wrench. If you don't have something this big, then you're probably going to want, especially when you pop these things out, you're going to want an extension bar or a pipe or something. But I'm lucky enough to have this thing that I purchased a while ago, thinking that maybe one day I'd use it, and I've used it a few times, but I'll tell you what, this thing really comes in handy for doing ball joints. Just check it while it's going in and make sure that it's going in even. And the cup that I'm using here, the spacer, it's not exactly the one that I want, but it's the one I ended up using. Got to be real careful because the diameter is very close to the diameter where this is going to be pushed through, and I don't want to have it push against itself and start wearing on the part. Alright, I'm starting to get quite a bit of tension. And it looks like it's seated pretty well. Let's see if I can get a fingernail underneath it. Yeah, a little bit, so it can go a bit more. So I went ahead and put this straight bar on, just so they don't strip the gears of that ratcheting one. so that is pretty snug. Yeah, I can't get my fingernail hardly in there. Whoop, goes my seat. Just for good measure. And yeah, it feels pretty good all the way around. Yep. So go ahead and back this off and take a look. All right, that looks good to me. All right, so there you go. There is one lower ball joint in, and it is seated all the way around. I can't get like my nail underneath it or anything. So we'll go ahead and start the top one. That was the one that was interesting. The last one that I did. So I'm going to just time elapse the comedy of errors until I get this thing set up. All right, so that was worse than the other side that I did trying to get this set up. And the thing is, I'm just short on space to use the part that I want to use. So the message is here, I have the kit from Harbor Freight, and it worked well for getting the parts out. It's not working so great with getting the parts in. But especially, you know, if you rent a kit from AutoZone or O'Reilly's or something like that, I know it's like $200 and something, but you get that money back. They loan it to you for free, and some of them even have the correct spacer that's concaved for the Jeeps, so that you don't have to worry about putting spacing. On the other side, I ended up not putting spacing, and it's seated properly anyway. I was trying to use a washer, but it kept getting in the way of the amount of material that was coming down through here, and that only leaves a very small space for a spacer to fit in there, and trying to keep that in was just a huge pain. So I ended up seating it without. I'm going to go ahead and try to seat this. The whole point of the large wrench is I need a flat plate. I don't have bar steel, and using a file again is not an option, since that would definitely blow up, since there's a huge void right there. And so I looked around my garage, and this large wrench is all that I had. I used it on the other side. I need to get this down most of the way, and then once I do, I can actually use the part that I need. So I'm going to give this a shot and see what happens. It's starting to slide in, so it is actually working. Once I get this down far enough, I'm going to back it off and use the part that I need to finish it out and make sure that it's seated properly. What I wanted to use was this cup here, and it is seating it looks like properly all the way around, even though this cup wasn't sitting properly on here. I know that there's probably going to be some people that complain about that, but you know, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. You can follow this or not, completely up to you. And got it to fit on the other side, I thought. I'll use this ring instead. Alright. Now I gotta remember what I used. But I'm just working with what I have, and it is seating properly. I'm not feeling it, you know, do anything awkward or bind or anything like that. So as long as it works and it's getting the job done, it's what I'm going with. But again, I highly recommend borrowing the good set from one of the auto stores and getting yourself a good extension bar or ratchet. So I'm going to switch to the other one so I don't hurt the gears on that one. It's just my seat again. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go all the way around, make sure I can't get my thumb nail around anything, and I can't. That is really seated in there well. And that's all the way around. So there's no high spots. I can't get my nail in there at all. So I'm going to say that's good to go. So I've already done the other side. Sorry I didn't film that, but I was only going to film one side anyway. So both ball joints are done. I will show one other thing. Let's back this off. To be honest, I wouldn't say that this job is necessarily hard. It's kind of like when I did the heater core, it's just a huge pain. And all the videos, or a lot of them, they skip all the steps, and maybe you're thankful for that. And whereas I'm showing a lot of this problem solving and the issues that I'm having. You can call me an idiot, call me a dumbass for doing certain things if you want. It doesn't bother me, but things don't always go as planned, and I just want to show you that and not make you think that this was super easy for me. And for some people, I'm sure they can do this in, you know, an hour, but this is my first time doing it, and I am at least learning from it. So next time will probably be easier, just like the heater core. I'll probably do it in much less time, and I'll know what to do, and hopefully this video helps you out as well. But so the last thing is I just want to make sure that now I've got the other side disconnected as well, because I did not take off my tie rods. So I just want to make sure everything lines up. So this is one reason why you might want to take them off. So I didn't bring the nut over from the other side, but everything is going into place, so I don't want to drop this to go get the nut, but I can get the nut on from the bottom here and then push that the rest of the way up. But I'm actually going to do the other side first because that's the order that I took them off, and by putting that tie rod end on first, it'll definitely help get this tie rod end on this side. So again, it's up to you as to whether or not you want to remove your tie rods. If I was doing this again, I would definitely do the entire thing on one side, then the entire thing on the other, because then I wouldn't have to play with both tie rod ends being loose. I only did that for the purpose of this video, for one, and two, because I was waiting on the parts to come in. So I'll once I get everything sorted out on the other side, I'll reinstall this side and show you the installation process. Alright, so before reinstalling this, you definitely want to make sure that you have your rubber boots back on before you actually put this on, and then realize that you did and then have to take it all off or take it all apart. So if you took these off to protect them like I did, then you want to make sure that you put them back on. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to pack a bit more grease in here and inside here, just to make sure that it's full of grease, since some did come out by taking the boots off and then messing around with the ball joint. Alright, so I packed grease in the lower joint, put the boot back on, made sure it was sealed all the way around, and then the same thing with this one. And then I went ahead and put the fitting back on so that no dirt gets inside, since the tape fell off while installation. And now got the lower castle nut here. Now I'm gonna reinstall the casting. So the right orientation goes up, and then screw this on. And then the upper one. Alright, so now I'm going to get out my torque wrench. The bottom one gets torqued to 80 foot-pounds, and the top one gets torqued to 75 foot-pounds. And then also you want to make sure that your orientation of the hole within the bolt lines up with one of these indentation or cutouts, so that you can stick your cotter pin through. Alright, so I've got it torqued to 80 foot-pounds, but I need to back it off just a little bit so that the cotter pin goes in. And you want it to go in smooth, because if it doesn't go in smooth, then when you try to take it out, there's a good chance that you're going to have a really hard time with it. So this one goes in okay. I just take the one end, bend it up back around the bolt. I don't actually cut off the other end like some people do, because I like to have that to grab onto if I need to, if I have an issue with the cotter pin getting stuck. It's just one extra part that I can actually use to try to get it out. So I don't cut off any part of the cotter pin like some people do. I'll just bend it up out of place. So that's that one. And now we'll do the top one. Just gotta find the bolt. I already put it on. After looking for it, I did the smart thing and I actually put it on, and forgot that I put it on. So, alright, this one is going to be 75 foot-pounds. go. Okay, so now that that's done, we can focus on doing the axle shaft. So mine got a little dirty when I took it out of the axle tube, so I'm going to clean that up and straighten this wheel out, and then from there I'll show you how to put it back in. Alright, so now that I'm going to install the axle shaft, I want to try to do it without getting any dirt on the end of the axle shaft on the spline. So what I was going to use is a thin strip of cardboard, but I decided to go with this leftover garage door seal. Actually, plastic comes attached to this, and I cut off the seal to use the plastic, and it goes around the sides of garage doors. But so what I did is I slid it all the way down the tube, and I have it touching the very end. So the reason that I use this is once I get the axle shaft in, and once it's seated in the middle of that seal, it won't be touching the ground, and then what I can do is just pull out this seal, and that way if my axle shaft end hits the ground, or the bottom, it won't get dirt all over it. So I just cleaned it off, and there was a ton of dirt from letting it touch the top and the bottom while I was pulling the shaft out of the tube, and for that reason I don't want to get it back in. And for that reason too, I am not going to put grease on the ends here. I've seen people do that, but if you touch the top or the bottom of the tube, that grease is just going to act as a magnet. There's oil inside your axle housing, so it's going to get oil just by being in there. I understand the reason why people do it, but every time I put this in, I can feel that somehow I'm touching the tube, especially on the longer one of the two. The short one isn't so bad, but on the long one it is. I'll probably touch up this area here with a little bit of grease, but I'm not going to put it all over the end here, just because I don't want it to be a magnet for dirt. And so let me try to install this and see if this idea works for trying to prevent dirt from getting on the end of the axle shaft. I can feel it touching. And I'll bet you this thing is full of dirt. So I already did touch the top once, and without grease being on the end, I did check it, and there was very little dirt, even though I had touched the top of the axle shaft. And actually, using this rubber seal works really well because it slides really nice until you get to the end. Pull some of the seal out. All right, so that seemed to work pretty good. The only thing that I'd do different is that I would have the seal come out on over here rather than where the hub goes in, because I did have to reposition the hub after it was already in place to pull the seal out. But I'd say even cardboard might work, but I did end up having to drop it on the bottom of the tube a couple of times, and by having that seal in there, it probably got less dirt on it. And then that's also one reason why removing the hub, it makes the job a little bit easier, I didn't want to go through all that, and you know what, for a few extra seconds of having to maneuver this a little bit more, it was worth not taking the entire hub off, and the dust shield stayed on there as well. So it's all back together. Now all I got to do is bolt this thing down and then put my calipers back on. Check the boots here, and they seem to be pretty good. I just replaced those not too long ago. And then one thing about the calipers is you might have to press those back a little bit if they're going to be, if you had trouble getting them off, which I did on that one. So I'll see if it works or not without having to press them back. And something that I just noticed is, I don't know if you can see it or not, I forgot to attach my ABS, so that's what zip ties are for. I am not taking this apart, taking that bolt off, because actually this has to go around the knuckle and then go underneath. So I'm gonna figure out a way to zip tie it so it doesn't interfere with the coil spring and anything else as it moves. I'll leave some slack on it, but yeah, that's staying the way it is. The other side will be done. So as I'm about to put the bolts back onto the hub and the steering knuckle, I'm sorry I kept calling it the casting just because that's the first thing that comes to mind, probably from my old job. But one thing that's good to have is I've got this layout here in this little booklet, but I've also got the torque specs here for just about everything. There actually weren't torque specs for the ball joints, but there are for the hub to be attached to the steering knuckle, and that's 75 foot-pounds, so I'll do that now. Alright, so now that I've tightened those 3 bolts down and have the hub secure to the steering knuckle using a 13mm 12-point socket, those torqued down to 75 foot-pounds. Now we can install the rotor. Before you install the rotor, it's a good thing to hit this with some brake clean, so you make sure you don't get any grease on it, and then just be careful how you handle it, putting it back on so that you don't get grease on the actual rotor, which will could have possibly affect your braking performance. So now that that's on, we can take our caliper. I'll see if this thing will fit or if I'm gonna have to mess with it. And it looks like I'm gonna need to press this back a little bit so that there's enough room to go around the rotor. Alright, so all I'm doing is taking a piece of board and I've got a clamp. I've got it against the pad, and then I'm going to press it back towards the fluid chamber. Now normally what you'd do is you'd open up the inside of the cap for the brake fluid. I'm just pushing this back a little bit. It's not going to be a whole lot, so there's not going to be a whole lot of brake fluid that's going to end up coming out on this. So that should do it. Let's see if that works or not. And that's all it took. So I can straighten this back out a little bit. And you want to make sure that your brakes sit correctly. And that they're in the proper location. And then you can take one of your bolts and try to line it up. Alright. And then I'm going to take this 12mm ratcheting wrench just to tighten it down, and then I'll have the torque wrench go the rest of the way. And this is going to be caliper to the caliper mounting bracket is 30 foot-pounds. Down to 30. And that's it. So all we need to do is mount up the tire. Now I've got to zip tie this as well, but that's pretty much it. So I'm not going to show mounting a tire, and don't go putting your greasy hands on the rotor when you're done. Alright, so once everything's back together, or at any point during this process, you do want to grease your upper ball joint and your lower one if it's a greasable one. So you want it to kind of fill up a little bit here, but you don't want it to bulge out so much that it breaks the seal. So just until you start to see it bulge, and that'll be enough for what you need. Alright, so that's pretty much it. I am going to finish the other side, then I'll put the tires on. I'm not going to show actually putting the tires on. I'm sure you can figure that out. But please leave your comments and suggestions below. I'm sure that there's going to be quite a few of them. This is just the way that I decided to do it. If I had to do it again, I would absolutely do it this way. I wouldn't disconnect the tie rod. I wouldn't disconnect the hub. I would just do it this way unless I was replacing those parts. So, but that's just me. Feel free to leave your comments below, recommendations. You did this, you didn't have to, whatever it might be. I'm always learning from this, and hopefully other people can too. So thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and talk to you soon.